Okay, so let me continue from where the Zoom went off. A distinction can be made between near and far transfer as far as transfer of training is concerned. Please mute your microphones. When we talk about near transfer, we are basically making reference to the extent to which an individual will apply whatever they learned through a training program or a training intervention to their immediate job. So the example I was giving is that assuming you went for a training program which was cardinally to help you know how to drive a car. Now, having gone through that program, we say there have been a near transfer when you come back and you are now driving an automatic car at your workplace. So what you went to learn at the driving school was what? How to drive an automatic car. And you've also been given an automatic car at your workplace and you are driving. That will be a near transfer. So basically, whatever you learned on during the training program is what you are now applying on the job. Now, this can be distinguished from far transfer, which involves some form of additional expansion or some form of improvisation. So in far transfer, a typical example would be going to a driving school, learning how to drive an automatic car, but now applying your knowledge about moving forward, backwards, turning, curving, and so on and so forth, to drive a manual car. When that occurs, we say there is far transfer. So unlike near transfer, which has to do with your ability to apply what you learned from the training program directly onto your job, in far transfer, there is some amount of improvisation on what you learned during the training program. So you expand upon it and you incorporate new things you have acquired in your environment. Now, to maximize transfer of training, research has identified 5 main avenues that can be used. And what are these avenues? The first one is that the elements that are going to be transferred should be identical. The elements to be transferred should be identical. Now, the principle of identical elements suggests that the more similar the training and the performance situations are in terms of the stimuli presented and the responses required, then the more likely it is that the training transfer will occur. Now, think about it this way. You want to learn how to type. Okay, you are learning how to type. You went to a computer school and the keyboard they are using to teach you is the normal QWERTY keypad. However, at your workplace, you don't have computers, but you rather have what? Typewriters, which have different keypads. So because of the dissimilarity between these identical stimuli, it will be very difficult for you to transfer what you learned during the training program onto the job. Now, we are advocating that to design an effective training program that will enhance transfer of training, the elements and the stimuli, the objects that are used at the workplace should mimic the ones that were presented during the training program. So if at the workplace you are going to drive an automatic car, then at the training sessions you should be trained with an automatic car. In the same vein, if you are going to drive a manual car, then during the training sessions you should be taught with a manual car. That is the basic tenets of identical elements. The second issue has to do with what we call general principles, and which simply means that before you can train someone for them to appreciate what you are doing and for them to also transfer the training onto the workplace, it is important that you give them some foundations. And that was the main reason why, before I even started this class, I took you through what human resource management is before I went further to human resource development. And my expectation is that by introducing you to the field of HRM and gradually linking it to HRD, you will get the basic foundations and you'll be able to hit the ground running. So that is basically the general principles. The next issue has to do with stimulus variability. Now, research indicates that the link between the business environment and training sessions is constantly changing. The link between the business environment and most of the training sessions that we run are constantly changing. And so we shouldn't design training interventions which rigidly use archaic content. Rather, the training intervention should be designed in such a way that the trainees will be exposed to variable or numerous stimuli that they are likely to use. So back to the driving scenario. If you are teaching someone how to drive and their portfolio is to be a driver of an organization, you shouldn't have the frame of reference that because they are going to drive an automatic car, by all means, they only need to learn how to drive an automatic car. This is because there will come a time where perhaps the car will break down and the new car that will be introduced to the person will be a manual car. And so the trainee must be exposed to different training objects or training resources for them to be familiar with it, so that when the time is right for them to apply it, they will not be found wanting. And the last issue that can be capitalized on to enhance or maximize transfer of learning is what we call the support in the work environment. Ideally, when a given working environment is such that, those of you with your microphones off, please turn it off. With your microphones on, turn it off. Okay. When a given environment, when a working environment is such that it discourages people who try to apply what they learned from a training program or what they learn from other mediums, then it will be useless to be encouraging such individuals to go for a training program, because the culture over there is such that it tramples upon people who want to take the initiative and apply what they have learned. So basically, we are saying that for transfer of training to occur, the organization must also have a supportive culture which embraces people to apply what they have learned out of a training program. There shouldn't be a culture which prevents people to be applying what they have learned. And you all remember the third principle of learning, which is practice. If you do not practice what you have learned over time, it will extinct. So we are all admonishing that the environments where employees work should be supportive enough so that it will encourage them to practice whatever they have learned. Now, to summarize, today I have introduced you to a few issues as far as learning is concerned. I started by talking about learning, and I indicated that learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior, cognition, and affect as a result of one's interaction with his environment. And out of this definition, I also indicated that there are certain salient aspects of it. The first one is that we expect learning to have occurred when, after a longer period of time, the individual who went through the learning process can still recall what they learned. And again, we expect learning to have occurred when there is a relatively permanent change in how someone thinks, how they feel, and how they behave towards events or stimuli in their environment. Once we monitor and verify some of these things, then we can say learning has taken place. Then I moved on to the learning principles. And I touched on the principle of contiguity, the, the law of effects principle, and also the principle of practice. The principle of contiguity is basically saying that whenever two objects are associated in a learning process, they tend to be repeated easily. The law of effect is basically saying that when behaviors are followed by desirable expectations, the degree to which such behaviors will be repeated in the near future is high. So when pleasurable experiences follow a behavior, the chances that the behavior will occur again is high. And the third principle is practice, which I explained a while ago. Then I also took you through the main strategies you can use to maximize learning. And I indicated that you can target the characteristics of the trainees. So trainee characteristics in terms of their personality, their trainability, and their attitude. I also made mention of the fact that to maximize learning, you can design the training program in such a way that it has good content and it's also properly delivered. Then I also talked about how you can maximize learning by employing transfer of training. Now, in designing the training program, I mentioned that you can employ what we call conditions of practice. Some of the examples and the conditions of practice is where you allow the trainees to employ what we call active practice. You give them the opportunity to practice it frequently. You can also juxtapose mass versus space practice, where you will decide whether they will learn it in chunk or what I mentioned as chew and pour. Whether you sit down and last minute, you learn it and then you go and practice it. Or you will learn it sparingly. So you spread it across the entire semester and then you will practice. Then still under training design, I also made mention of how you can retain what is learned. And you can retain what is learned by making reference to the meaningfulness of the material. That is where you can use mnemonic devices or acronyms to assimilate what is learned. The degree of originality, where we made reference to the extent to which the original material was appropriately learned so that it can be easily recalled. And interference, the degree to which the learning process will experience some form of distractions which will truncate the processing of the information into the long-term memory. Then I also moved on to the transfer of learning by indicating that you can have three main typologies, whether there is a positive transfer, a negative transfer, or a zero transfer. We say there is a positive transfer when the performance of employees on the job improves as a result of the training program they went through. We say there is a negative transfer when the performance of employees on the job worsens off as a result of the training program they went through, and so on and so forth. Then I also ended with how you can maximize transfer of training, or how you can maximize the transfer of learned materials. You can do this by using identical elements, and identical elements in the sense that whenever the items which are being learned is a direct reflection of what is expected to be performed at the workplace, then we say they are identical. And that was when I gave an example that if you are training a driver, you can make it identify by, for instance, if you want to, the driver is going to drive an automatic car, then at the training session, you'll be using an automatic car so that they can make that positive correlation. Then we also have the general principles where you give the trainee some fundamentals or basics about the area that they are venturing into. Then stimulus variability, where we are encouraging you to use numerous, we are encouraging you to expose the trainees to numerous opportunities that they are likely to face on the job during the training session, so that when the time is ripe and those events actually unfolds, they will be able to handle it successfully. Then the environment that the trainee is going to work eventually can also be used as an avenue for maximizing transfer of training, in the sense that if the environment is embracive enough, it accommodates people to apply new issues that they have learned, then the trainees will also be incentivized to practice whatever they have learned. And the reverse is true. Any question? Yes, Jefferson. So let me stop the recording.